The first time it happened, I thought it was coincidence. Everyone wakes up at strange hours sometimes. I remember opening my eyes to darkness, so complete it felt solid, like a wall pressed against my face. My phone lay face down on the nightstand, vibrating softly, the screen lighting the room with a pale blue glow. 3:33 a.m. I turned the phone over, annoyed at myself for checking the time, and rolled onto my side. That was when I heard it, 3 slow knocks, not on the door, not on the wall, but somewhere deeper, as if the sound came from inside the apartment itself. I held my breath, counting the seconds between knocks. There were none. Just 3 deliberate, patient taps, and then silence so heavy it rang in my ears. I told myself it was the pipes. Old buildings talk at night. They creak, they groan, they knock like arthritic knuckles. I lived alone on the 4th floor of a concrete block that had seen better decades, and I'd learned to ignore the sound that came with age. Still, sleep didn't come easily after that. I lay there staring into the dark, waiting for my heartbeat to slow, waiting for my mind to let go of the image it kept returning to. Someone standing just outside my bedroom, hand raised, deciding whether to knock again. The next morning, daylight scrubbed the fear clean. Sunlight always does that. I showered, made coffee, and laughed at myself. Stress, I decided. Work had been relentless, deadlines stacked on deadlines, and my sleep schedule was a mess. When night came again, I promised myself I wouldn't look at the clock. Whatever time I woke up, I'd roll over and go back to sleep. No checking. No counting. No feeding the anxiety. But promises made to yourself at midnight feel fragile at 3:33 a.m. I woke with the same sense of pressure in my chest, the same certainty that something had pulled me out of sleep instead of my body doing it naturally. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I lay still, eyes closed, repeating my promise. Don't look. Don't check. That was when the whisper came, so soft I almost missed it. My name. Just once, drawn out, spoken with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. I opened my eyes. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. I looked anyway. 3:33 a.m. This time the knocks came again, 3 of them, but closer. Not from the walls. Not from the door. From beneath the bed. I don't remember getting up. I remember standing, my feet cold against the floor, my hands shaking as I reached for the lamp. Light flooded the room, harsh and yellow, revealing the same ordinary mess it always did. Clothes on the chair, books on the desk, nothing under the bed but dust and a single shoe I'd lost weeks earlier. I laughed then, a sharp, ugly sound, and told the empty room to leave me alone. Saying it out loud made me feel foolish, but brave, like I'd challenged something and won. I didn't sleep after that. I watched the clock until sunrise, counting minutes, watching the numbers change, relieved when 3:33 a.m. became 3:34, then 4 o'clock, then morning. When I finally left for work, the hallway outside my apartment felt longer than usual, the lights dimmer. I locked the door behind me and stood there for a moment, listening. Silence. Just the hum of electricity and the distant sounds of the city waking up. At work, I mentioned the time to a colleague, half joking. Do you ever wake up at the same time every night? I asked. She frowned. That's the witching hour, isn't it? She said. 3:33. My grandmother used to say it's when things are closest to us. I laughed it off, but the word stuck. Closest. The rest of the day, every time my phone vibrated, my heart jumped. That night, I tried everything. White noise. Music. A movie playing quietly on my laptop. I fell asleep to familiar voices, comforted by the illusion of company. When I woke, the movie had paused, the screen dark. The room was silent. I didn't need to look at the clock. I knew. The air had that same oppressive weight, that same unnatural stillness. Then came the sound of breathing. Slow. Steady. Not mine. It was coming from the corner of the room, where the light never quite reached. I lay frozen, counting my own breaths, trying to convince myself it was an echo, a trick of the walls. My phone vibrated. I squeezed my eyes shut. 3:33 a.m. The breathing stopped. Something shifted. The faint sound of fabric moving against fabric. I felt watched, examined, like an insect pinned to a board. Stop, I whispered, my voice barely there. The word felt inadequate, childish. The reply came immediately, right beside my ear. Soon. I screamed then. I don't remember deciding to scream. It tore out of me, raw and loud, filling the room. The lights snapped on as my hand slammed into the switch. The corner was empty. The air was normal. My phone lay silent. 3:34 a.m. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, every light on, television blaring, refusing to let darkness settle. By the fourth night, exhaustion had dulled my fear into something sharper and more dangerous, curiosity. I started researching. Forums, articles, old blogs written by people who sounded just as tired and scared as I felt. The time came up again and again. 3:33 a.m. A mockery of something holy. A doorway. A signal. Most of it was nonsense, superstition wrapped in modern language, but one post stood out. A long thread buried deep in a forum, written by someone who claimed the time wasn't when it started, but when it answered. According to them, waking at 3:33 a.m. meant something had noticed you noticing it. I stopped reading after that, but the idea stayed with me. That I'd done something wrong by looking at the clock, by acknowledging the time, by reacting. That curiosity had been the invitation. The next night, I decided to confront it. I don't know why. Maybe because being afraid had become unbearable, and doing something, anything, felt better than waiting. I set an alarm for 3:32 a.m. and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, heart pounding, phone in my hand. When the alarm buzzed, I turned it off immediately and waited. The second hand on the clock ticked loudly, exaggerated in the silence. 1 minute passed. Then another. 3:33 a.m. arrived, like a held breath finally released. Nothing happened. Relief washed over me, so intensely my knees weakened. I laughed quietly, shaking my head at myself. I'd been building it up, feeding the fear, letting my mind run wild. I stood up, ready to go back to sleep, when the lights went out. Not just in my apartment. In the entire building. Darkness slammed down, thick and absolute. My phone screen lit up automatically, the only light in the room. 3:33 a.m. 3 knocks came from the door this time, loud enough to rattle the frame. I didn't move. The knocks came again, slower, more insistent. "You're late," a voice said from the other side. It sounded like mine. My hand shook as I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The third set of knocks came, and with them the sound of fingers dragging down the door, nails scraping wood. "You invited me," the voice said softly. "You looked. You listened. You waited." The door handle turned. I watched, helpless, as it twisted. As the door opened just a crack, darkness spilled through, thicker than the dark behind me, swallowing the light from my phone. A shape pressed against the opening, wrong and familiar at the same time. An eye appeared in the gap, wide and unblinking. My eye. I don't remember much after that. I remember falling. I remember the sensation of being pulled, stretched thin, like taffy. I remember the sound of my own voice screaming my name from somewhere very far away. When I woke, I was on the floor of my apartment, morning light streaming through the windows. The power was back. The door was closed and locked. My phone lay beside me, screen cracked, the time frozen at 3:33 a.m. I tried to tell myself it had been a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination. I called in sick to work, stayed in bed all day, jumping at every sound. As night approached, dread settled in my chest. I didn't want to sleep. I didn't want to be alone. I considered packing a bag, going to a hotel, calling friend. In the end, I did none of those things. I stayed, because a part of me believed that leaving wouldn't change anything. That whatever had noticed me wasn't tied to the apartment. It was tied to me. That night, I fell asleep without meaning to, exhaustion dragging me under. I dreamed of mirrors, rows and rows of them, each reflecting a version of me that was slightly wrong. Eyes too wide, smiles too slow. In the dream, a clock ticked loudly, its hands spinning backward. When it stopped, the time read 3:33 a.m. All the reflections turned to look at me at once. I woke up screaming, my throat raw, my body drenched in sweat. The room was dark, but not silent. The sound of breathing filled the air, overlapping, layered, as if more than one set of lungs was at work. My phone vibrated. 3:33 a.m. The breathing stopped. Footsteps moved across the floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears leaking out, whispering every prayer I could remember, every word that felt like it might protect me. A hand brushed my hair. Gentle. Familiar. Almost, a voice said, "You're getting closer." The days that followed blurred together. I stopped sleeping. When I did, it found me. Always at 3:33 a.m. Always closer. Sometimes I'd wake to see it standing at the foot of my bed, wearing my face like a mask that didn't quite fit. Sometimes I'd hear it whispering to me from inside the walls, from inside my own head. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering my phone. I covered the clocks in my apartment, smashed my phone, convinced that if I couldn't see the time, it couldn't reach me. It didn't matter. On the seventh night, I woke without fear. The room felt calm, almost peaceful. I knew what time it was without looking. I knew it was there. I sat up slowly, meeting its gaze as it stepped out of the shadows. It looked exactly like me now, every detail perfect. "It's time," it said. "I can't come through unless you let me. That's the rule." I laughed softly. The sound surprised me. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. It smiled. "You won't have to wake up anymore." I thought of the exhaustion, the terror, the endless nights. I thought of how small my life had become, narrowed to a single moment on a clock. 3:33 a.m. I realized then that it wasn't taking me. It was replacing me, slipping into my days, wearing my life, while I stayed trapped in that moment forever. "No," I said, and the word felt solid. Real. The thing's smile faltered. "You already did," it said, confused. "The first time you looked." I shook my head. "No," I repeated. "I looked. I listened. But I didn't invite you in." The room trembled. The clocks I'd smashed began to tick again, their broken hands spinning wildly. The thing screamed, not in anger, but in frustration, as the shadows pulled it back, unraveling its shape. "I'll see you again," it hissed. "Every night." The room went silent. Morning light crept in through the windows. I was alone. I moved out the next day. New city. New job. New life. I don't keep clocks anymore. I don't check the time at night. I sleep with the lights on. Most nights, I sleep through until morning. But sometimes, I wake with that familiar pressure in my chest, that sense of being watched. I don't look at the clock. I don't need to. Because deep down, I know exactly what time it is.